On this week's Live with Littlewood, with June the 21st just 19 days away, is liberty just around the corner? Will the economic bounce back be as robust as we hope? Or could central state planning of our schools, of television advertising, of what we're allowed to watch on television, scupper those of us who want a freer future? All of that coming up on tonight's show. Kapow, welcome to another episode of Live with Littlewood. Thank you for joining me, Mark Littlewood, Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs, for a free market look at the big issues of the week. Coming up tonight, can state planning set pupils on the right track post-COVID? With both schools and universities shut for large chunks of the last year, will the lockdown generation ever get back on par with others? Will the government's decision to only spend an extra £1.4 billion in additional education funding be enough? We'll also be looking at, later in the show, how statist control over our TV screens is going. Does the BBC still represent, if it ever did, a worthwhile project in return for an effective tax on your TV set? And is the state over-regulating the adverts we watch? But before we get into tonight's show, before we get into all of that, we do know that 60% of you who watch Live with Littlewood every week are not subscribed to the IEA London YouTube channel. Here's a plea from me. We're well on the way to 12,000 subscribers now. So if you are a viewer, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an IEA video. Now that's out of the way, I'm delighted to be joined again by Mike Graham, presenter at TALKRADIO. Good evening, Mike. How are you? Have you got your glass of wine in hand?
I have indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Matt. It's been a very long day. You know, I've been out there trying to do my best to boost the economy. A little bit of lunch at the Ivy Club. You know, what can I do? Delighted that you asked me back. Thank you.
Great. True patriot, Mike. True patriot. Eating our way back to recovery. And a warm welcome to the show to Suzanne Moore, columnist at the Telegraph. Suzanne, how are you? Lovely to have you with us.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm going to do my bit and go out for dinner after this.
There we go.
Such
like a tag team.
Yeah, I mean, the economy is going to be booming before we know it. So we're going to begin tonight's show by exploring the barriers to the lifting of lockdown and asking whether they're really going to come out of the way. Is June the 21st going to be Freedom Day? Is freedom coming home? We know football's coming home. England are nailed on to win the Euros, I'm sure of that. But is freedom coming home as well this month? Suzanne, what's your take? Do you think... We heard from the Prime Minister earlier today with him saying, well, the data looks like we can take this step, but it's not completely certain we can. Do you think that we'll find on June the 21st all of the restrictions have gone, a delay, or only a partial withdrawal of them? What's your best guess?
Yeah, I'm going to hedge my bets there and say a partial delay. I don't see, with the caution that he's advising for the first time in his life. I mean, if he follows this, I think that there'll still be restrictions on the 21st, and certainly around travelling for sure.
So you think international travel, but do you think we'll stay in the present state? Will there be some loosening on June the 21st at least?
Yes, I think he has to do that just to keep to be able to claim, you know, that he's sort of kept his word. But I think because of the result of the last two kind of late lockdowns, he is going to take the advice of the scientific community, which is still at the moment, as he said today, we just don't know yet.
Mike, how optimistic are you feeling? You're doing your bit for the economy by eating out at the Ivy, but do you think we'll be able to do this without any social distancing and wander up to the bar and have thousands packed into the pubs for the Euro football? Or are you, with Suzanne, a bit more circumspect? Perhaps we're going to have to wait a bit longer.
Well, I think that people are fed up at this point, you know, so I think the people will decide exactly what will happen. Because I was out this weekend in London, Hyde Park was absolutely rammed with people. The Serpentine looked like, you know, it always looks in the middle of the summer without a pandemic going on. And I think an awful lot of people are now just doing what to do. I've just even last week or so, Mark, people are much less likely to be wearing masks out in public. People are much more likely to be crowding into places. I've been doing, I mean, it's not just about me, this, but, you know, I have been doing quite a lot of imbibing in various different restaurants, different clubs and that kind of, and people have just had enough. And people just go, you know what, we're going to do this. I was on the tube this morning, and more people actually were wearing masks. So I honestly think that the way of lockdown is by the reaction of the people rather than the instructions of the government, which I think people have enough of.
Do you think that's right, Suzanne? Do you think what we'll actually see is almost whatever the rules, enforcement might become rather harder? I mean, I've actually slightly lost track of what the rules are about how many households can sit around a table at a restaurant, 6 of you, but no more than 2 households. Is that the rule? But there doesn't seem to be any meaningful enforcement of this as there was last year.
No, that's right. I mean, I was at the beach on Bank Holiday Monday in Kent, and I mean, there were so many people that it was actually unpleasant. I mean, so in the end, some sort of equilibrium will happen. At the moment, everybody is crowding everywhere they can, especially, and who can blame them, younger people. But I mean, this is part of, I mean, I'm not so desperate for everything to be opened up on the 21st because, like, what are the things that I can't do now? Go to a nightclub. I mean, this affects my children possibly much more than it does me. So I think different generations have got different attitudes. And if you look in the different cities, the teenagers are out, young people are out, and yes, they have certainly had enough. But I would, in terms of risk, I still feel quite wobbly, and I still feel that whatever we do outside is fine. I am still not happy about going on the tube. You know, it doesn't feel risk-free to me yet. No.
But Suzanne, do you think that can now be left, fair enough, but do you think that can now be left to each person to make up their own mind? I mean, we're not forcing anybody into pubs or restaurants. If you only want to eat outside, or you don't want to, and you're not happy travelling on the tube yet, you can wait as long as you want until you travel back on the tube. Do we need the government to dictate that you mustn't, though? Do you see what I mean? Can we now just allow people to make their own judgments of the risks that they're willing to take?
Well, I think that's kind of what's been happening. As Mike said, people are doing that, I think, anyway. As soon as a lot of people, as soon as they had the first vaccine, were doing that. I think it's, the constant monitoring of this new variant and how many cases and is it leading to hospitalisation and so on. Quite a lot of people, I think, have just, to be honest, switched off to it almost. And whether that's good or bad, or whether it's a sort of almost self-preservation thing, there is only so much news you can take. There is only so much science that you can work out. And we all have to make our own risk assessment, as you say. But I actually just don't think we're very good at risk assessment. But that's my experience.
Okay, we're just going to have to take a quick break in order to fix some of the audio issues. We'll be back with you very, very shortly.
You've got the word there.
How's that?
Seem to have been. And we're back. We're back. Sorry about that technical issue, taken down by some nefarious technical glitch. But we are back. Mike, I was just about to ask you. You were saying people are getting sort of sick of the lockdown. Suzanne was, sounding a bit more circumspect, still feeling a bit like there's risk about. Do you think people are just going to return now? I mean, it almost, for a large number of people, what the government actually says on June the 14th about June the 21st, sure, you won't be able to go to a nightclub if they keep them closed, but our day-to-day business will actually get back to normal irrespective of government edict, won't it?
I think that's right. And actually, I think, without wishing to in any way try to think what goes on in Boris Johnson's brain, I think this is kind of the way he wanted it to end. He doesn't want to be blamed for anything to go wrong. He wants to be able to have that kind of escape blame, if you like, that the people have taken umbrage at all of the restrictions, and they've done what actually he wanted them to do in the first place, which was to be careful, to be cautious, but also to be responsible in the way that they are now reintroducing themselves to life. And I think what we are going to have, unfortunately, and I take Suzanne's point absolutely on board, I think we have a two-tier society. We have a society of people who are now so fed up with COVID restrictions, they've had a vaccine or possibly two, they don't really care anymore, not worried anymore. This time last year, I think people were genuinely frightened. They didn't know how bad COVID could be. They didn't know if they could kill their grandparents. They didn't know if their parents could be visited by them. They weren't sure if it was a good idea to get on an underground train. And again, there are still people who may feel that way, but they're a diminishing number. And I think most people now would just like to be allowed to do whatever they do. And I think they're fed up also with this idea of being allowed to do it. Because, if you think about it, why should we be allowed to walk around without a mask on? How about you just take the mask off and walk around and see what happens?
Suzanne, let's assume either on June the 21st or slowly thereafter, maybe it'll be delayed a little bit, we get back to no government restrictions. How confident are you that the economy will bounce back fast? We've been in a kind of artificially induced coma, the economy for a while, which should mean there's bounce back ability. It's not like going through a war. It's not like infrastructure's being destroyed. The OECD this week has suggested that the UK economy is well positioned to bounce back faster than the Eurozone, faster than the United States. Do you share that optimism, or do you think it's going to be a long, slow climb back to get back to where we were in February 2020?
Yeah, I think it has to be a slower climb back, partly because of the effects of Brexit hitting. And I think there's a real confusion at the moment around house prices. We've had this boom. I've also seen a crash predicted. Will that continue? But job-wise, I would like there to be definitely a lot more jobs for young people especially to get back. And the idea that, say, for instance, we're hearing in the hospitality trade, they can't get enough people is kind of extraordinary. But also, some of us thought that we would use this time to reboot the nature of work, like people do not need to be in offices 5 days a week and all of that kind of thing. But I can see that, again, it's like Mike said, a two-tier system. There are people who do need to be at work in places 5 days, and there is another sort of sector of people like me who don't have to. And again, I think that it's economic reasons will push people back into offices that they maybe don't need to be in.
Mike, how confident are you? You're doing your bit by eating out to help out for your own expense, or the expense of your host, no longer subsidised by the taxpayer as it was for that mad period of time back in the day. Look, there's been a bit of good news, right? The Heinz are building a new factory. Ketchup is coming home, the biggest UK manufacturing investment since Brexit. Domino's, Suzanne referenced this, are desperately trying to hire workers. You've even seen some hospitality businesses that are offering their current staff a bounty for recruiting their friends. They want to recruit so many staff. Are you bullish or bearish about the bounce back, Mike?
I'm very bullish about it, actually, because not least my 16-year-old has been trying to get a job working anywhere that he can for the last year or so, has finally got one working in a local sort of French restaurant down in Sussex, where he's waiting tables and getting his hands dirty, washing up dishes for £5 an hour. And he's all got 3 of his mates already working there as well. And so, I know that you can't always use these kind of little small independent kind of pieces of information anecdotally to extrapolate what's going to happen around the country. But I think it's true. There's definitely a sense of optimism. I mean, I've seen, if you consider where we were even 2 months ago, there wasn't anyone going out anywhere. And I know that we can't over-egg the whole idea of hospitality and the idea that people are spending money, but people are spending money. I had a call today on the show from a guy who was in Greece. He went to Greece on holiday, right? He decided he would just go for it with his family. He gets in a car. He drives from northern Yorkshire down to the Eurotunnel, gets on a train, gets off in France. He's got his PCR test ready to show somebody. Do you know what he told me? He didn't see one border guard, not one customs official from France to Italy. He got on the boat in Brindisi, went to Greece. He's now in Greece having a great holiday. Nobody's asked him for a PCR test. Nobody's asked him for anything. So, we have this kind of ridiculous scenario where people are going to go, do you know what? The hell with it. Let's just go. Let's just go on holiday. Let's just get out of here. Let's just spend money, whether it's abroad, whether it's at home. And I think, these estimates of a 7% sort of jump in the economy, I think are absolutely accurate. And I think it could be even bigger than that, because people have just become so sick to death of doing nothing that they'll do anything. I mean, look at the roads over the bank holiday weekend. People are literally going anywhere just to get away from where they've been.
Yeah, that's about right, isn't it? But in addition to the restrictions, what about the support mechanisms in place? I mean, Suzanne, the furlough scheme was initially to give, workers in particular businesses a little bit of a bridge while those businesses were put in the deep freeze for a few weeks. That's rolled on and on and on now, right? I mean, surely now we know whether these are viable jobs that they can return to or zombie jobs that are going to sadly disappear. And if the latter, we need to kind of get on with it, don't we? We shouldn't really have furloughed workers now the economy's working up. If, unfortunately, those businesses are gone, we've got to help them find new jobs.
Yeah, I think this is a really difficult situation for some people as well, because I think if you have been furloughed, there's a real expectation that you sort of somehow owe your boss when you go back. And again, this idea of choice about how you work and how many hours and all of that stuff has gone out of the window, because particularly smaller businesses feel, no, if I want you back in at work and I want you to do this many hours, that's what you're going to do. I think furlough was good. I totally understood it. I supported it. But at some point, some of the jobs will go. I mean, so again, that's something to balance, isn't it? In this, if the economy is going to bounce back, where are the new jobs going to come from? Not just ketchup, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Mike, do you think it's time, if we are getting back to normal, that all the government support schemes, which, cost an arm and a leg, and even sort of fiscal hawks like me have not necessarily worried about that. Governments will spend more money during a crisis. But do you think it's time to call a halt now? We've got to say, not just back to normal in terms of your freedoms, but back to normal in terms of we're not going to be paying large chunks of people's salary if they're not actually going to work or if their business isn't actually doing business.
Well, listen, we are supposedly being ruled by a Conservative government. It's not the job of a Conservative government to pay people not to work. I would like to see certain jobs done away with. For example, I hope that Downing Street has not replaced Dominic Cummings. We don't need to pay some bloke some ludicrous amount of money to give a load of bad advice and be completely useless and admit later on afterwards that he actually wasn't fit for the job anyway. I think what it would be a good thing to do would be to start cleaning out the civil service. Start making some people redundant, make them go and find jobs in the private sector, give a bit of help to small business, which has been sorely lacking for a long time, and stop people wanting to work from home. I mean, I take Suzanne's point that she can work from home if she wants to. She's in a very privileged position, you know, and it doesn't make her a bad person, but, good luck to her. But a lot of people who should not be working from home have a responsibility. It's not just about what suits you. It's about what suits the country. And quite frankly, if you work for a company that's headquartered in London, you should be in the office now. You should be using the local pastry shop. You should be using the local dry cleaners. You should be using the local restaurants so that you are contributing to the economy. You can't just sit there storing up money for your pension and not meeting anyone. I think that's the wrong idea. And I think the government should be encouraging people to get back to a normal way of life, which human beings are supposed to be doing.
Mike, I know you've got to hop off to join your employer's talk radio to earn your crust, but you'll be back with us, I think, in about... you'll be back with us in about 15 minutes, so thanks very much indeed. Suzanne, stay with us. We're also joined by, from the IEA home team, Professor Len Shackleton, Editorial and Research Fellow here at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Very good evening to you, Len. Great to have you with us. I'll come to you for your thoughts on whether we're going to get Freedom Day on June the 21st in just a moment. But Suzanne, picking up on Mike's point, do you think we're going to see now a very, I mean, it might not be a divided society as such, but very different patterns depending upon the line of work you're in, potentially your age? I mean, again, anecdotal here at the IEA, but it's typically been the people under the age of 30 who've been very keen to get back to the office, almost as a socializing feature, and perhaps those, you know, over the age of 40 who are sort of, well, actually, I can do the job perfectly well from home.
Yeah.
They quite probably live in bigger homes with bigger gardens than the rest. Do you think that will be a long-term?
I mean, I think it is going to be a long-term divide, and I also don't really agree with Mike's idea that we just get back to normal. I think things have changed. We should acknowledge that they've changed. We should try and work with the changes, and that, as everybody has sort of said, you know, certain inequalities have just deepened and certain divisions have really been made apparent. And the biggest one, and I mean, I almost feel like we owe, like, that generation 16 to 24, I would say, it's almost like we should pay like reparations like after the war or something. I think that's the generation who have lost out, and we should really look after them.
Len, good evening to you. Great to have you join us again. Thanks very much, Len. I want to move on to schools and education. People even a little younger than those that Suzanne has just mentioned in just a moment. But Len, what's your take? I've already grandly predicted football's coming home and England are going to win the Euros. Is freedom coming home as well? Do you think everything will snap back on the 21st of June?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I hope Boris can hold his nerve on this because heaven knows we've been waiting long enough. I mean, if we miss the summer because, you know, another 6 weeks or something gone by, then it just makes it even more difficult for all the businesses which are, you know, are in non-profit making mode at the moment. It makes it more difficult for people to face another winter of this kind of stuff. So I really hope we can do something. I mean, it's better now than it was. I've been out in pubs a few times, done a few things, but you know, it's not normal life.
Let's come on to Suzanne. You mentioned this intriguing idea or sort of moral principle that perhaps the young deserve some compensation. Let's look particularly at schools rather than young workers, because of course school kids and university students have had incredible disruption to their education, and we're now in a game of playing catch up, having lost that time. Now the government today has announced another £1.4 billion to education budgets. I understand a large chunk of that's to help particular kids with private tutoring. Do you think we're going to be able to achieve this sort of catch up, Suzanne, or is it going to be the case that if you are unfortunate enough to have this year as one of your university years or a crucial GCSE year, you're just going to be behind? Obviously not your peers, but those slightly older than you or slightly younger than you.
Yeah, I mean, my youngest has just come home from the first year of university, and it's been entirely online. Certainly she has missed out. I mean, there's no question. It's not just in terms of actual education, is it? Kids not going to school have suffered in all sorts of ways, younger kids. I mean, I think teachers have worked hard on Zoom, but you cannot pick up a lot of the problems or do a lot of the face-to-face stuff. Kids need to be in school, and socially they've suffered. I mean, I've got lots of friends who've got 14-year-olds who almost now don't want to go out, who are so used to being stuck in their rooms with a screen, that yes, there are going to be long-term problems, and we should, you know, I think we should just sort of face up to that instead of it. I don't think you can expect children, you know, to bounce back. We have to make sure that we give them as much as possible.
Len, you wrote a paper for the IA back in February when the schools started reopening, saying called back to school. And you suggested that for all of the problems, the disruptions of the lockdown and the pandemic, that this was an opportunity for reform, changes to the school day, perhaps more online learning and that sort of stuff. Is your impression that the government's picked up any of your ideas, or are you disappointed with the lack of radicalism in trying to bring about catch up and change?
I'm always disappointed at the lack of radicalism, Mark. I don't know whether you knew, but just before you went on the air, Sir Kevin Collins, the education czar that was appointed, has resigned because the 1.4 billion is nowhere near the 15 billion he was calling for, and says it can't be done for less money, which is interesting. I think there may be something in that, but I don't think it's primarily about money. As I said in that paper, I think we need to rethink what we do in schools. We should look again, for example, at what we do at the age of 16. Should we be having 11 GCSEs? I don't think so. Maybe we ought to think about starting school a little bit later, at 6 rather than 5, because certainly my youngest, who will be 6 in a couple of weeks' time, the youngest in her year, and is way behind, at the beginning was way behind in developmental terms compared with people who started, who were born at a different stage of the year. There are things like this which could be done, which are not about money as such. It's about thinking where you want to go with this. The other thing I said in this paper is that we ought to give parents more power. I argued for giving them the pupil premium in terms of vouchers of things which they could use to buy tutoring and stuff like that. What's planned at the moment in tutoring, as far as I can see from the announcement, is that this should all be done within schools. It should be small tutor groups within schools. Well, that may work, but again, it's taking it out of the hands of the parents. I mean, I was very struck early on in this stuff by the stuff the Sutton Trust have produced on private tutoring, where in London, approaching 50% of middle-class parents are using private tutoring. And can we give, more disadvantaged groups access to this kind of thing? Not necessarily under the dead hand of the existing school system, but, let's widen it out and get more people involved and so on. At the moment, we have to more or less, most parents have to accept what they're given. And during the lockdown, the worst of the lockdown, our kids got very, very little support from the schools. It's not a bad school, but they were just not tuned in to this way of working. And, kids lost a lot of very valuable learning time. So sure. I want to see the schools shaken up. I don't want to just give them some more money. I mean, one of the things I saw today was that they wanted to give £250 million for teacher training. For God's sake, they get enough of that, right? We won't be going back to school next Monday because they're having a day off for teacher training and so on. That's not the answer. All it'll be is more diversity training or something. It won't be anything which has any feed in to what kids are actually doing. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be done. You asked me the question.
Suzanne, before I let you go, either in schooling or more generally, look, it's obviously been a grim year, even for those of us who've managed to avoid getting ill, and an absolutely horrific year for many. But do you think there are some small silver linings on the very grim cloud? Are there things that we have learned? Perhaps online learning will become a lot easier in future.
Yeah.
Working from home and the rest of it. What are the upsides that might actually be things we can take into the future and make our lives better, easier, more convenient, and the rest of it?
Well, I think we have learned what's important. I mean, what really matters to each of us individually, but as a society. I mean, one of the things that Len was saying, I agree with, that things need shaking up because too many people have regarded school as simply childcare, and actually school is not childcare, and it's got to be doing something else. So, and I feel that a lot of the education. Home education has fallen to women who are already busy, and we've really got to think how families work and how best we can move forward. But I don't know. I mean, it's awful to use a pandemic as a kind of model of like self-improvement, isn't it? As a moral self-improvement. But I think collectively we have to acknowledge that we've gone through a really hard time and that something good must come out of it. And I think for me, that thing is that we do give back to those that really lost out. And I feel very strongly that it's the young, that the young ones, the kids and the university students. So they would be my priority.
Suzanne, it's been a pleasure having you with us. Thanks so much for your time. Have a terrific evening. I think you're eating out to help out later on this evening.
I am.
Thanks for bearing with us through our technical difficulties as well. Lovely to have you on the show. Speak to you again soon, I hope. Len,
thank you. Bye.
Len,
Bye.
stay with us. We're also joined from the IEA home team by the IEA's head of lifestyle economics, Chris SNOWDON. Chris, great to have you with us. Thanks very much for joining us as well. I'm going to ask Chris just what I've asked some of the other panelists as well, whether he thinks actually freedom is coming back on June the 21st. Are we going to see the complete ending of all restrictions, the return to complete normality or not? Chris, are you with us? Ah, here he is. Here he is from his man cave, just right on cue. Well, a few seconds after cue. Chris, great to have you with us. Can you hear us loud and clear?
Yeah.
Okay, great. What's your take on it? Do you think it's going to be we're out of it on June the 21st, or a bit of sort of lingering, ongoing closures, restrictions for a good number of more weeks or months?
I think they'll certainly keep the travel restrictions, international travel restrictions. I would be surprised if they don't drop all the face mask stuff, because they seem very keen on that as a kind of prop to remind people that we're still in a pandemic. I honestly don't know about the rest of it. I mean, we really will know in 2 weeks' time. It will be pretty clear, I think, from the data in 2 weeks' time. I'm quite optimistic about it. I don't think things are rising that quickly. I think it's been a few hot spots which seem to mostly die down, and I'm confident that now we've got 50% of the entire adult population with 2 jabs, and we'll have more in 3 weeks' time. I really think that's going to be enough. The hospital admissions in England are still below 100 a day. They haven't really been going up. So, I think there might be, choppy waters ahead a little bit, but I think they will basically stick to the guns on most of it. Apart from international travel, anything that counts, I think will be good. But I don't know. I've been wrong before, as you know, Mark.
Well, yeah, but always interesting to hear your take. Good to hear you being bullish. Listen, we're going to move on to our next topic. Len is a prodigious author for us, and although we've touched on trying to get some of our old freedoms back, are some of our old freedoms actually being eroded away? Even once we've got through to so-called Freedom Day, are we going to continue to see a barrage of assaults on freedom? And we're calling this section Orwellian overreach. Regardless of the uncertain situation our businesses and children find themselves in, one thing that isn't really looking rosy is the freedom of advertisers. According to your new paper, Len, called Ad Break, Why Curbs on Advertising Harm Free Speech, we're sort of sleepwalking into this, aren't we? We're getting more and more restrictions, particularly on adverts, and not that would apply to other broadcasts. Tell us what you discovered in your paper.
Okay, well, this paper, of course, is one of a series which is going to come out in book form later in the month, and I hope viewers will avail themselves of that when it appears. But what in this particular paper I'm talking about is the way in which we've various restrictions on the way in which we can speak in advertising have been rising. Some of them come directly from government, and obviously Chris knows all the stuff about high, fat, sugar, salt stuff, which is restrictions on that, restrictions on alcohol. It's all that. Chris, are they out to get you or what? I mean, there are so many restrictions on the things you like, and certainly on advertising them. But what I was particularly concerned about was not so much the direct controls by government, which are at least debated in Parliament and we know about. It's the way in which the Advertising Standards Authority, which was originally a kind of self-regulatory body, has branched out into all sorts of, you say, Orwellian restrictions on the way in which people can be depicted in adverts and so on, in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity. I think in future we'll also see further restrictions in relation to climate change issues. And the ASA chief executive himself has spoken in favour of the idea of vetting political advertising, political manifestos and things like this. And this is all being done by a bunch of career regulators, basically, who are in this kind of woke bubble and want to see us all behaving in the approved way. And I think this is a problematic thing.
Len, this is fascinating. Other than, I mean, I was aware, obviously, tobacco can't be advertised on television at all. I think I'm roughly aware of what the restrictions are on alcohol, that you can't suggest that it improves your sexual prowess or something. What are the restrictions or guidance around ethnicity and gender? I wasn't aware.
Right. Well, there is a policy which was introduced in 2017 on gender, and this is all about you're not allowed to have stereotypes of things like men being idiots with the washing or you know, that kind of thing. Nothing humorous really is allowed, because that's regarded as anathema these days. And these restrictions, which go into a lot of detail really, were introduced really, but off the top of their head. There was some consultation, there were some forums held and so forth, but essentially they did what they wanted to do. The consultation wasn't really very deep and very lasting. What particularly strikes me, and if you've not looked at this stuff in detail, is fascinating, is the way in which, you know, there are controls on the way you can do things in commercials, which nobody would contemplate in terms of the theatre, film, television, or whatever. And this comes out sometimes. I mean, an example I quote in there is a swimwear outfit called, what were they called? I don't know, Misbehaving, something like that. And they had an advert showing girls in bathing costumes and so forth in the middle of Love Island, right? Well, Love Island, if you've watched that, it's about young people sitting around ogling each other in bathing costumes and copping off the sex later on. That's what it's about. And there was an advert in the middle of this with girls in bathing costumes. And that was, the ASA pulled that on the basis of one complaint. There must have been one viewer in the country who thought that it's absolutely outrageous in a programme full of girls in bathing costumes. There's suddenly a girl in bathing costumes in an advert. You know, it's that kind of thing which people are unaware of what's going on with this kind of policy.
Chris, you wrote a mammoth document for us a couple of years ago on advertising and free speech. What's your audit of the present advertising sector? Is Len right? It's not just the legal restrictions, it's the regulatory restrictions by the Advertising Standards Authority. Is advertising, at least on television, a kind of dying industry now, that you can't really do much more than sort of name your product and put up an email address where people can find more, and even now more and more products you probably can't even do that for. Adverts which are witty, funny, play on stereotypes, a thing of the past. No?
Yeah, I mean, and TV advertising in general is dying, of course, because it's all going online. But yeah, I mean, I think the stereotype point is an important one here, because if you're trying to tell a story, particularly a humorous story, in 30 seconds, you really have to use stereotypes, or at least archetypes, because you haven't got the time to build up the character and let the audience know what kind of person this is. So you have to kind of play on certain stereotypes. But the point is, the stereotypes in adverts are nearly always overturned. So it goes the other way. And I don't think there's anything wrong at all in showing a stereotype of, you know, men are bad at looking after children, for example, right? Men are only interested in football and beer, and they're a bit stupid. No men complain about this particular stereotype. Advertisers wouldn't negatively stereotype anybody else in that way, but men can take it. And in the adverts, the stereotype is overdone, and it turns out actually the man is really good at hoovering or whatever it may be. But you have to have these stereotypes in order to tell a story. Otherwise, it just becomes confusing if you suddenly throw in something else. So yeah, it's Len's paper is I think really worth reading on this, because it does show you the kind of insidious ways in which the creatives are stopped from doing their job. But often, as Len says, one person complaining. And this is one of the problems with the system. I look at quite a lot of Advertising Standards Authority complaints, because particularly in the area of alcohol, which actually the Portman Group mainly deals with, they're usually so ridiculous, and you can't even work out why there was a complaint in the first place. But these kind of, single issue pressure groups weaponize this system. In some cases, with the anti-alcohol lobby, they get a little parliament of teenagers in who are all being coached to, complain about certain adverts, and they will constantly complain about, for example, Captain Morgan Rum. Captain Morgan Rum, it's got a cartoon pirate, and they say, well, it's a cartoon, it's a pirate, it must be appealing to children, as if anybody has ever advertised rum to children, as a serious proposition. And so you get one person complaining, and then they have to investigate it, and then letter of the quasi law, it gets rejected. It's a bad situation, and the standard of advertising has declined, I think, actually, as a result of it. Adverts, I mean, the woke adverts are obviously dreadful. Is it the Volkswagen one that Len mentions in his paper? No sane person could even work out what the complaint would be if they didn't know.
Just before we bring in our next guest, there's another area of television I want to talk about. Len and Chris, let me ask each of you. Len first. To what extent is advertising not really about increasing overall consumption, but just getting people to switch brands? Because it seems a lot of this, perhaps not the more woke stuff about, whether you can show a woman doing the washing up, but quite a lot of these bans are justified on the grounds that they increase the consumption of unhealthy products. That was certainly the justification for the restrictions on cigarettes, alcohol as well, and now moving on to food. What do economists know about whether advertising increases the overall consumption or just gets you to switch from brand X to brand Y?
I think there are different studies looking at different products and so forth. I think the power of advertising is kind of exaggerated in a way. I think it is about switching brands rather than increasing your consumption of something. I mean, for heaven's sake, a lot of things, you just couldn't increase your consumption, could you? I mean, you've got a car or something. Most people can't afford 2 or 3 cars or would even want them. Yeah. But you can talk about switching from one brand to another, possibly. There's the classic line, of course, is that half the spend on advertising is wasted, but nobody knows which half of it. So it's a bit of a gamble for businesses, but we've got a great industry in this country of advertisers, right? Worldwide reputation for creatives, and yet we seem to be hog-tying it, as Chris says. And this is yet another area where we're not doing things which we're good at, and we're just trying to hobble them all the time.
Chris, very briefly, in a sentence or two, is advertising about brand switching or growth?
It's often said that it is when it comes to things like alcohol, but my example I always use is cat food. Pet food in general is advertised a huge amount, millions of pounds on pet food.
Toilet paper.
That's the other one I use sometimes. Slightly more earthy example, but toothpaste. People are not going to consume more of these things. Doesn't matter how much you advertise whiskers, you're not going to sell any more of it. It's clearly about brand switching. If people can get that into their head with things like Andrex and whiskers, other alternatives are available, then they should really get it into their head with things like beer.
We can be rejoined now, proving that leave doesn't mean leave. We're going to be rejoined by Mike Graham. So leave doesn't mean leave. He just hopped off for a while. He's returning, he's rejoining. And delighted to welcome Rebecca Ryan to the show from Defund the BBC. I want to turn our attention to this other area of television. One corporation that doesn't need to worry too much about the impact of these advertising restrictions on the bottom line is, of course, the BBC. This week marks the 75th anniversary of the licence fee. Is it time for a new vision for the BBC? It was introduced at a time of limited spectrum, one television channel, of course, for a long period of time. There are now 33,000 television networks globally, dozens of streaming services, many channels. Brits who own a TV set and watch live TV still have to pay £159 on the licence fee for fear of prosecution. Rebecca, welcome. Lovely to have you with us. What does defund the BBC want? I mean, the clue's in the name a bit, but specifically, what do you want changed, and are you winning?
Well, what we want changed is we want, for people not to be forced to pay for the BBC if they watch any live TV. So that means either it goes over onto a subscription model, or the license fee is just reduced just to covering down, just BBC content. I mean, how they fund themselves is up to them and their willing paying customers. But our view is that if you don't want to pay for the BBC, you shouldn't have to pay for it via basically what is a tax. Are we winning? Well, we have huge popular support. We gained sort of 100,000 followers on Twitter. Within the first week, virtually, it was very, very quick. It's something that people feel very strongly about. The government seems to be rather tone deaf to that, though. At the moment, I think this cozy relationship with the BBC is rather helpful at the moment, particularly with COVID. So yeah, we're winning on the popular front, but on the political front, I think there's still a lot of work to do there.
Mike, welcome back. I know you have to go and earn a crust doing talk radio. You guys compete with the BBC. What's your take on it? What do you think should happen? What do you think will happen? I mean, there's always, you get this sort of bubbling up of, is it all going to end? Is there going to be reform? And the lobbying power of the BBC seems to be extraordinarily high. They've got a new director general in place. Or is the end in sight now? Is this old idea that you've got to pay a license to own a TV set? Not that it's even very easy to define exactly what a television set is anymore. There's so many devices you can watch moving pictures on. Is it coming to an end 75 years after it was brought in?
I think it is moving in that direction, but to say that we compete with the BBC is a bit like me saying I walk across the street and I have to dodge 5 18-wheeler trucks and trying to run over as I'm trying to get from one side of the street to the other. The trucks of the BBC, I'm TalkRadio. If I manage to get across to the other side, good luck, and I'll probably be squashed on the way. Because the problem is the BBC, they're so big now. Defund the BBC is a great organisation. I take my hat off to you guys for taking this thing on. What I think we have to do is take it apart piece by piece, and I'd welcome a sort of a meeting to work out what the strategy should be. I think first, take it apart and then rip it to shreds. So don't do it all at once, right? You can't take it apart all at once. Separate out the news division from, the nonsense they do in what they call comedy and what they call drama. Make them separate them out. Make them actually start delineating what it is that they give us as a service. And then you could say, all right, now you've separated it out. You can tell us how much each bit of it costs. Because, I don't really think Hugh Edwards is worth 700,000 a year or whatever it is they pay him. I don't think Gary Lineker's worth it. He's so rich now, he's going to take off from BT Sport to go and follow Leicester around next year with his sons. I think what we do is we separate out the news division and then we strip it down and we go, okay, there is no reason for you to spend the kind of money that you spend. There's no reason for you to have 65 different local news radio stations around the country. There's no reason for you to have 10 different news TV channels, which nobody even knows they have, because they've got a different one that goes out on aeroplanes. They've got a different one that goes out on BBC World. They've got a different one that goes out to Scotland, to Wales. BBC Wales is run by people who are Plaid Cymru fanatics. BBC Scotland is run by people who are separatists, right? They want to break up the country. So we have to take them apart and say, look, do you really need to spend all this money on Strictly? Do you really need to do that? Because we, live and die on what we do. If we're not popular, it's not that the country's going to kill us off. Our company's going to say, sorry, guys, you're not making any money. You're off. You're done. You're finished. Back to the graveyard. Start writing stories again for the Surrey Advertiser and see how you get on. You know what I mean? So I think we're onto something. I think we've definitely got them worried, but we haven't got them worried enough. No. When the Martin Bashir story broke, Hugh Edwards had the gall to say, I won't take any lessons from certain sections of the media about ethics. Oh, really, Hugh? I mean, he's being paid hundreds of thousands of pounds for reading out loud. I could produce a 5-year-old that could do that for £5 a week. Sorry, Hugh. I'm not interested. I don't care you've lost weight. I don't care that you're happy now in yourself. I don't care that you think you're important. You're not.
Well, there you go. Yet again, the usually underspoken, understated Mike Graham. But Rebecca, to take up his challenge, do you guys at Defund the BBC, do you think you could break it down into its constituent parts? And you might say, I'm not sure I would, but one might say, that I don't know, our foreign news broadcasting has a particularly key role to play, or I don't know, educational programming, which is often then watched in schools, Strictly Come Dancing and quiz shows and EastEnders and Doctor Who and Match of the Day. That's just on the commercial end. I mean, you just got to run that commercially. But do you see any role at all for what's dubbed public service broadcasting? Maybe it doesn't need to necessarily go through the BBC exclusively. There could be a pot of money that Mike and Talk Radio could bid for, or Channel 4 or Sky Arts or various other companies. Any role for that? Or is it just marketise the lot? I have to say, I'm probably in that latter camp, but I'd be interested in your thoughts.
I completely agree with Mike that this strategy of breaking it up and pulling it apart bit by bit and then putting it through the shredder sounds great to me. However, the main issue we have is the complexity of the TV license and how it's funded. And I think, people have got to the point now where they just don't want to pay for it. They don't want to get into the sort of, ins and outs of which bits and which other bits they, should stay and which shouldn't. But I agree that would love to meet up with Mike and have sort of tactical discussion about how we could do that. And I think what Talk Radio are doing actually is really, really important, because even with GB News being launched now, people are very excited about GB News, but actually you need a TV license to watch GB News live, and therefore they will be funding the BBC. And so unless GB News have a very good on-demand offering, they're not going to be able to compete with Talk Radio, because Talk Radio, you can watch Talk Radio on YouTube without a TV license because it's not a TV channel. So it'd be interesting to see what their offering is. But, I think what Talk Radio are doing, we get emails all the time asking, can I watch Talk Radio on YouTube? And I'm like, yes, because it's not a TV channel. You don't need a license to watch that on YouTube. But I think we just need to have, what we're calling for now actually is a referendum. We want a referendum on this, because poll after poll that we're seeing, it's sort of, 70% of people in the most recent poll said that they would vote for a party that supported getting rid of the TV license. And we're seeing, we've commissioned some of our own polls, other people have commissioned polls, and we see the same results over again. Sort of 2/3 of people don't want to pay for the BBC anymore. So let's have a national debate about it, and the government need to sort of get out of their cozy club. But when it comes to, as you were saying about public service broadcasting, I think the world has moved on significantly since then. I think, as you said, it should be divided up between all broadcasters can have a piece of that remit. It shouldn't sit all within one organisation. What you see when all the power is put in one organisation is the power corrupts, and that's exactly what we have with the BBC.
Your referendum idea, though, Rebecca, I'm quite attracted to referendums in general. They're great fun, and they kick up a load of controversy. What's not to like? But I'm a bit sceptical about this. If let's say, for sake of argument, I know your polling shows differently, but just hypothetically, for sake of argument, let's say that 60% of people want the licence fee in the BBC and 40% don't. I'll be damned if I'm going to pay for the viewing habits of the 60% majority. They should just pay for it themselves. If 60% of people want to watch it, you pick up the bill, right? We don't have a referendum on whether everybody's got to have Netflix or not. If you want it, you pay for it. If you don't, you don't.
That's true. But the thing is, at the moment, you don't. You said about TV set. Actually, you don't need a license to own a TV anymore. You just need a license if you want to watch live TV. And the reason why this is sort of, they're on borrowed time anyway. As Portillo said, they're on a polar bear clinging to a piece of melting ice, because once you switch over onto on demand, Netflix and Amazon Prime and what have you, and all young people, they don't watch any live TV. But once people your my age have done that, you can't really imagine why you would sit waiting for a broadcaster to sort of dish out a program at a particular time. So live TV is, unfortunately for other live TV channels, the BBC is hurrying the demise of live broadcast TV.
I should listen to these lessons rather more carefully, because it's true that about 95% of viewers of Live with Littlewood don't watch it live. They watch it over the next week. So I'm still caught in this old-fashioned TV broadcasting mentality. Let me come to you. Where do we think we're at with the BBC? And would your advice to the BBC to be to sort of modernise yourself rather than clinging on to the license fee for the last year or day or week that you can possibly cling on to it? Wouldn't it be better for them, especially under their new Director General, to say, right, we're going to clear the decks, we're going to come up with a new model, might be a subscription model, I don't know, could privatise certain parts of it, keep others, some parts of it perhaps funded by direct taxpayers' grants. Should they grasp the nettle rather than just sort of cling on to the licence fee for every last hour that they can possibly cling on to it?
Absolutely. Sorry.
No.
Go ahead,
I think
Len.
this should be bold, really. In the long, the BBC has a fantastic brand overseas and so on. It's got a lot going for it if it goes into the market. And much as like Mark, I quite enjoy referendums for the fun and games. This is not a way to handle this issue, I don't think. The market is the best referendum as far as things like this go. They've got to be shaken out of their current situation. There's great stuff at the BBC. I'm not a total BBC hater. There's some good stuff there, but there's a huge amount of dross, and there's a huge amount of stuff which could be done by somebody else. So I'd like to see something like, what was being suggested by Mike before, that, we split it up into its bits and we see how they work in a market. Go for it.
Chris, what's your take? What would you like to see happen to the BBC? Should we just hold Rebecca's referendum and then auction it all off at Christie's, under the hammer, bit by bit, one Monday morning? Or our own Professor Philip Booth here has suggested it could sort of model itself a bit on the National Trust as a sort of model that the licence fee, people who choose to pay the licence fee would be members and who would then elect the board or whatever. That could be quite amusing. I think you could get people like Kelvin Mackenzie and Nigel Farage and Jeremy Clarkson.
Come on, it's woke enough at the National Trust, isn't it? We don't want that.
No, that's true. Maybe not the best model. But Chris, how would you tackle it? What do you want to see done to it or with it?
It should just be a subscription model, exactly the same as Netflix. If you want to watch it, you pay for it. If you don't want to watch it, you don't pay for it. I think it's really very simple. It used to be a public good. It was non-excludable, non-rivalrous. It's not anymore. That used to be a very good argument for it. If people can get it for free and they've got a choice about whether to pay for it, obviously people are going to become free riders. But now that we have the technology to just allow people who want to pay for it to pay for it and people who don't not to pay for it, then to me, really, it's a no-brainer. I can't see any serious argument against it because it's not public service broadcasting. I'm not a big hater of the BBC. A lot of people who want to defund it do hate the BBC. They think the news output is too left-wing and so on. And of course, they're right, and it does irritate me when I watch Newsnight and stuff. I was on the BBC this morning on 5 Live, and my opinion about smoking, that the government shouldn't be hammering smokers into the ground, was considered eccentric. My view that maybe some people who own pubs should be allowed to allow smokers to smoke in them was considered almost insane, right? They were just being laughed at by Nicky Campbell for expressing these opinions. So yeah, of course it annoys me, but I kind of get around that by never really watching it. The only thing I watch on BBC is Inside Number 9, really. And I probably wouldn't pay 160 quid or whatever for that. So this for me used to be kind of a principled thing, and it's wrong to force other people to pay for it. Now it's a personal thing. It's like it's quite expensive to watch TV now. If you've got Amazon Prime and Netflix and there's Apple and Disney, the cost mounts up, plus Sky as well if you got that. And I'm starting to really begrudge this 150 quid or whatever it is,
Interesting point. I should point out, though, for the avoidance of doubt, Nicky Campbell isn't the only person who considers you slightly eccentric, Chris. Be fair. But Mike, let me come to you. Do you think, and it's easy for folk of our persuasion, I think often to say this, but do you think that the BBC has got worse in terms of bias? My vague recollection when I was a sort of kid is that people on the right thought the BBC was too left-wing, people on the left thought the BBC was too right-wing, and that was sort of some indication, whatever its funding model, that they perhaps got the balance about right. But I would say now it's almost all folk right of centre who consider it to be left-wing, and very, very, very few people on the left, because it hasn't become like the Guardian.
Yeah, exactly. The only people, Mark, who think that it's in some way bogus and biased in favour of the Tories are the mad kind of Corbynistas. Basically, everybody else knows that if you are a Remainer, the BBC supports you. If you are anti-Brexit, the BBC supports you. If you are pro-lockdown, the BBC supports you. Everybody knows the BBC is now not fit for purpose. And also asking it to kind of reform itself, to me, is a bit like asking the House of Lords to reform itself. You know, look what happened to them. You know, ever since we asked the House of Lords to reform itself, they got away with most of the hereditary peers, apart from about 99 of them. They're still in there, and there's even more people in there than there were before. So you can't give the BBC the right to reform themselves. There is no question that people in this country overall do not trust the BBC and its news output. You know, if they want to make, you know, drama, if they want to make films, if they want to make Strictly, fine, but don't pretend to be a news service. People talk about the world service being, you know, the soft diplomacy around the world of the government. Some people have even suggested that the world service should be funded by the government. God forbid, you know, we don't want to get the government involved in it. But actually, we need to just strip it down. As I said earlier, there is no other way about it. We cannot trust Tim Davie to fix it, because Tim Davie's already proven himself to be a complete and utter useless individual at culling the worst aspects of what the BBC do. And Christopher Snowdon's quite right. You know, when you say things that you and I would consider normal, they look at you at the BBC as if you've gone completely barking mad. And, you know, they're calling for the men in the white coats because, oh my God, it's okay. People should be able to smoke in a pub garden. You lost your mind. I mean, you know, it's ridiculous. Totally mad.
Lady and gentlemen, let me finish by asking each of you the same question. Rebecca, I'll start with you, because you'll have the most insight in this, running the Defund the BBC campaign. Why is it proving so difficult? You would have thought, would you not, that people's changing habits, now getting used to, you know, buy Netflix or not, buy Disney Plus or not, and if you start watching those, don't want to pay the licensing. People's changing habits, getting used to sort of pay-as-you-go television or subscription television. The drift of the BBC, if we're right about this, to a more left-wing political axis, and a Conservative government with a majority of whatever it is, 80 or so, must be the perfect storm to get it, the whole thing reformed, you know, sold off, you know, them to follow your exact manifesto, Rebecca. How could the stars align more perfectly for you? Why are the Conservative government so utterly pathetic on this point, even in the face of public opinion?
I think there's so many questions over why the Conservative government are sitting on the fence on so many different issues. You know, they've got a huge majority, huge sort of public support, still on, you know, still even now, and they're still following this extreme centrist position on pretty much everything. So, you know, it's shocking that we haven't progressed any further. But at the same time, you only have to look at their position on, you know, net zero, and their position on all sorts of wokist policy. So, you know, I think they're almost in a stupor. I think the Conservative Party haven't really recovered from this sort of the nasty party image, and they're sort of, the machinery is all led from, you know, the London Conservative Party, and they're very much sort of you know, died in that sort of culture, and that we saw over the Brexit situation that they were perfectly happy to have Theresa May's deal, and actually they were completely out of touch with the Conservative membership, the larger support in the country, and I think that's still very much where they're at, where they eventually we got Brexit done, sort of, but they still view, as Mike was saying, the BBC treating the sort of Brexiteers and smokers and what have you as complete freaks of nature. I think in some ways the Conservative Central HQ view their membership and support base outside of London in that same sort of way as well. You know, not to the same extent as the BBC, but a bit.
So, Rebecca, you're the kind of Nigella Farage of the get rid of the BBC campaign. You can't trust the Conservatives to do it, so there's going to have to be a referendum and take it straight to the people, right? That's the best mechanism of doing it. Len, what's your view? You would have thought, or I would have thought, I do think that the ingredients for radical reform all seem to be here, right? So why is it proving so sluggish to get it done? It seems to me one of the easier, more sort of free market reforms to put through, popular, possibly even in the narrow interests of the Conservative Party, not that that's how public policy should be made, but all of the ingredients are there.
Well, government just does too much, doesn't it? I mean, this is the thing. They can't settle on anything for more than 5 minutes because along comes another issue and so on. For people who've not been used to this kind of stuff, remember, the people in this government, what were they doing 3 or 4 years ago? They weren't spending all their time thinking through these problems. So they're overtaken by events all the time. I wish we could go back to the days when like Harold Macmillan, the Prime Minister, used to go to bed in the afternoon with a trollop, didn't he? Do a bit of reading, have a break. Nowadays, you just can't do it. They're constantly from morning till night. They're just, stuff is being thrown at them. They're making decisions. Nobody can take the time to think through an issue. And this one, you see, it's not an urgent thing, the BBC. Everybody knows it ought to be changed, but it's not. There aren't huge mobs demanding this. There aren't calls for a public investigation, inquiry, and they don't have weeping people appearing on television talking about it. So it gets shoved to the bottom of the pile, and they go on to the next problem. I think that's the fundamental problem with it.
Chris, what's your take? I've often wondered, Chris, whether we could get, I guess Rebecca might want to reflect upon this, more weeping people on television. I mean, the non-payment of the licence fee is about 10% of all criminal cases in the UK, by number, not by time in court. It's close to, I think some years has been, it's close to being the highest cause of imprisonment of women of a certain age group. I would have thought it's right for people to protest about it. But Chris, if the stars haven't aligned now to get Rebecca what she rightly wants, when on earth are they going to align?
Well, every year it'll get easier. Every year you'll have younger and younger people getting older and older, and they will have no real memories of the glory days of the BBC. And that's what it comes down to. The reason it hasn't happened, it's sort of status quo bias and nostalgia. In the 20th century, the BBC was the best broadcaster in the world. It's got a lot to be proud of. It's got an incredible archive. It's made incredible programs. It hasn't done very much good in the last 20 years, I wouldn't say. And it doesn't, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion, justify the license fee. But if the government tried to take it on, look what happens to the government when they try and make very minor adjustments to the NHS, right? Massive outrage from people. You would have David Attenborough, arm in arm with Owen Jones, marching down Whitehall, accusing the Tories of trying to destroy the BBC. The BBC still has a lot of purchase in people's minds as being a great British institution with some good reason. Most of it, as I say, nostalgic, but it has a lot of purchase there. And I think it will happen eventually, but probably not for another 10 years.
If it is a straight fight between, on the one hand, David Attenborough and Owen Jones arm in arm, and on the other hand, Rebecca, I reckon my money's going on Rebecca, actually, to win that particular referendum. Mike, let me finish with you. You would have thought that something would have been done now, or I get annoyed that it hasn't been. The IEA comes up with lots of sort of free market reforming ideas that we know aren't practical. Our job is to think the unthinkable, not to be worried about the day-to-day politics. But this is one where I kind of thought, my God, the day-to-day politics and people's attitudes and consumer behavior, all of this is coming together. This should be something that's going to get over the line. What's it going to take to make sure that in the future your metaphor of having to cross the road whilst avoiding 18-ton trucks in the form of the BBC simply no longer applies? What's it going to take? What ingredients are we missing?
Well, I think we need to take a lesson from the plastic bag people, right? If you imagine how long ago it was that you used to take a plastic bag out of a supermarket and not feel guilty, it wasn't actually that long ago. So I think what we ought to do, we may need to wait till poor old David Attenborough passes on and he's not there anymore, telling us about how the world's going to end. And then Owen Jones will simply be hit by a truck at some point, and we'll all go, thanks very much indeed for everything that you brought us, and we'll move on. The point is, I think that, you have to nudge people now. The way that we now succeed in changing people's attitudes is convincing them. So I think that those of us who are on the side of trying to change the BBC need to adopt that kind of, that model. And so let's tell people how bad they are. Let's continue to expose the amount of wastage that they have in broadcasting house, 10 million quid on a taxi bill. Let's continue to mock people like Hugh Edwards for making £600,000 or £700,000 a year for reading from a script. Let's continue to completely and utterly defenestrate them so that people actually have no confidence in them anymore. Point out the mistakes they make all the time, and I mean, I'm not shy about this. Launch an absolute propaganda campaign against the BBC. and ruin them. It's the only way, because if you wait until they decide to kind of, police themselves, we'll all be dead.
Much done, my friends. Much left to do. Mike, Rebecca, Chris, Len, thank you very, very much for joining me for this week's Live with Littlewood. My thanks to Suzanne Moore, who joined us earlier. Let me just finish with a couple of non-regulated commercials. Please join us for the IEA's virtual Think conference on the 12th of June. It's completely free to attend, but you do need to register. Our speakers include Tim Harford, Vince Cable, Matthew McCaffrey, and Ruth Kelly. Stick around for the end of this broadcast. There'll be a promotional video about that after the closing credits. We also have, I'll be in conversation with Dominic Frisby on Monday, the 14th of June. Please join us on the IEA London YouTube channel for that. Please subscribe if you're watching us, and hit the thumbs up button if you've enjoyed the broadcast, and hit subscribe and the notification bell. A special thank you to all of our IEA online patrons. Thank you for your donations to keep us on air. We can't forcibly charge you 159 quid a year, so we have to rely on your voluntary generous donations. Your names are running across the screen now, but my particular thank you and shout out to our VIP IEA online patrons such as Timothy Worrell, Mark Edwards, and James Burns. Thanks very much indeed for your generosity. Stay safe, stay free. Thanks for watching. Thanks again to all of my guests. Subscribe, sign up, hit the notification bell. Have a very good evening. Over and out.
Inspiring, informative, dynamic, diverse,
entertaining, liberalism,
challenging,
disruption,
futuristic.
So, how is politics at the moment? Well, it's a total mess.
Modern economics should become humanomics.
If you really want to tackle a problem, rather than thinking about things, what you've got to do is be part of the solution.
The whole point of Think is to question everything you think you know.
Ideas around liberty, free markets, freedom of speech.
Are you left or are you right? It's not a black and white distinction anymore.
I don't think anyone would disagree that we're in the midst of a free speech crisis.
People that want to understand economics and how does it impact within society.
You people, very few of you, will have the old school job for life.
I'm an optimist, and I don't think we've seen anything in terms of the progress that's coming.
I hope to make one or two people question their assumptions.
Something that's going to challenge the opinion that I